Now that we've all had a chance to experience the story of Rebirth and mull over its narrative and mysteries presented to the player, one thing is clear. The theme of loss is critical for the game's story. And of course this is fitting for a game titled Rebirth. We have to lose something for it to be reborn. And we explore this loss throughout the game at several instances. Now don't get me wrong, this theme is balanced with light moments, levity, and exploration, but always, time and time again, the story brings us back to reality by reminding us through some of our characters just how much they have lost. It underpins every moment, anchoring us in the solemn reality that threatens this world. I'm going to give a spoiler warning for the events of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Remake here, as I am going to be discussing major events in the game's stories. The world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is dying, and it has been for quite some time. Our main cast of characters is proof of this, with suffering and loss informing their actions and driving their individual stories forward. If we look at their actions, their past, and what they have been through, we get a strong understanding of their motivations by looking at what they have lost. Loss is scattered everywhere throughout their stories and seems to be what binds the party together. They know what each other has been through, even vaguely in some cases, but that understanding does bond them. Mostly, they fill in the gaps of each other's stories, not daring to pry into the intricacies of the obvious trauma that drives them forward. It seems as if the characters skirt around deeper issues of their companions so as not to re-traumatize each other. Well, Rebirth doesn't give them the chance to hide. It pushes these issues to the front and forces a confrontation. Our protagonists are forced to relive the loss in their lives and, even worse for them, share these moments with the party. It's visibly painful to watch them revisit these moments of loss and confront the way that they have adapted and changed. There's a grim understanding between the party when they learn of each other's pasts and the sheer amount of loss they have suffered through. It does create a deeper understanding and does bond them together stronger, but for us, as the player, we constantly get reminded of what they have lost and how much loss is factored into their lives, their personalities, and their moral compass. Rebirth opens 5 years prior, in a flashback to Nibelheim, letting us see how loss impacts Cloud, and particularly Tifa. Tifa appears as a plucky go-getter, eager to help the visiting soldier squad and prove herself a capable guide. She appears to be confident, well-adjusted, and has a yearning to see more of life. What happens on this little excursion fundamentally changes her as a person. It's a literal bloodbath, where her whole world goes up in flames. The village is razed to the ground, and with it, burns away her cheerful demeanor. It emphatically changes her disposition and outlook on life. Watching her village burn down, the only home she had ever known, her views on the world understandably shift. She collapses in front of the Mako reactor, holding her father as he dies in her arms. This window into Tifa's past sets up the story and fleshes out Sephiroth as the central villain of the game. However, it also shows the deep impact this event had on Tifa. It's the moment that radicalized Tifa against Shinra. This enormous loss is a defining moment in her character history. It triggers a chain of events resulting in her eventual joining of Avalanche and the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake. This loss changes the trajectory of her life. It makes her become a wanted fugitive for crimes of eco-terrorism. Skipping ahead a bit, midway through the game, we visit Northern Corel as the party makes its way towards the Gold Saucer. Here we learn about Barret, a character whose narrative has been largely overlooked in the Remake and Rebirth games thus far. Before this point, we know him as the leader of the Sector 7 Avalanche contingent and the father of Marlene. These character traits, alongside his overwhelming dislike for Shinra, make up the majority of what we know of him. So far, he has had a lot of screen time, but he doesn't offer much of himself to the rest of the party. Upon visiting North Corel, we learn why exactly this is, and, in my opinion, he had a really good reason not to overshare. The burden he carries is extraordinary. Barret hails from a mining town and, in the past, was one of the prominent voices supporting Shinra's involvement in the town's Mako mines. He thought accepting Shinra's financial incentive to access the town's natural resources was a necessity to improving the conditions for the people living in the area. On paper, it's hard to disagree with this decision. It's perfectly understandable to want a better life for everyone in the town. Shinra is a huge company and presumably would be responsible for their actions, at least to those not in the know. When Shinra's operations go awry, as they usually tend to do, innocent people end up paying the price. The population of the town is devastated as Shinra attempt to cover up their activity by slaughtering as many people as they can. Barrett watches in horror as friends, neighbors, and loved ones lie strewn across the street of his hometown. The death of his beloved Myrna, alongside Eleanor and presumably Dine, Marlene's parents, crushes him. The loss of his hometown, massacred by Shinra's forces, transforms Barrett into the person we know today. He takes Marlene and leaves North Corel. Taking Marlene acts as both a form of penance and punishment. He genuinely does love and care for her, but she is an unwitting, constant reminder of what he did, what he invited in, what he feels responsible for. She is a physical manifestation of his survivor's guilt and his efforts to atone. His actions in present day, his involvement with Avalanche and hatred for Shinra, are all seeded by the grief and loss experienced on that one fateful day. Jumping ahead again, later in the game we visit Cosmo Canyon and finally learn about Red 13. What I said earlier about Barrett applies doubly to Red. We know next to nothing about Red. We know he was one of Hojo's experiments and harbors a deep resentment towards him and Shinra by extension. Cosmo Canyon expands his character, and I would go as far as saying reinvents him to the player. He drops the facade of begrudging companion, far wiser beyond his years, and becomes a far different character. This is Nanaki, his given name. He's not solemn, all-knowing, or ill-tempered. He's enthusiastic, idealistic, and much more friendly than he would have you initially believe. His sense of loss is different from the others. It's true that he lost his parents in an attack on Cosmo Canyon by the Gi, and this is the catalyst for him changing. However, I think the lost Nanaki experience was more of his loss of innocence. Believing that his father abandoned his duty in protecting Cosmo Canyon from the Gi caused him to spiral. He couldn't accept that his father would do that to the people he was sworn to protect. It changed him and drove him towards pushing himself to become a worthy guardian for Cosmo Canyon. This decision led to a chain reaction in which he was captured by Hojo and experimented on, creating the persona of Red 13. Nanaki's loss was his sense of self. The lie that his father abandoned his people in their time of need caused him to reject his heritage and created a need to prove himself. The final section of the game involves the party exploring the Temple of the Ancients and each party member undergoing a trial to prove themselves worthy. This short section is a condensed look into the loss each character has experienced, a bite-sized segment where the Temple of the Ancient attempts to re-traumatize each character. The temple protects the black materia, knowing that its terrible power has the potential to wreak havoc on the world. These trials test the mettle of the party, their conviction, in an effort to ascertain whether or not they are worthy of wielding this devastating materia. Nanaki relives his efforts to escape from Hojo's men, hunting him as he left Cosmo Canyon. It ends with a graphic sequence in which Nanaki is physically branded with the moniker Red 13 by Hojo. The game presents button options to the player, almost suggesting that we could resist capture and escape from the encounter. Of course, that's not possible. This is a memory. We're looking at events that have already occurred. It's viscerally uncomfortable to watch as he is essentially tortured before our eyes. It's this exact moment where Nanaki is lost and Red 13 is created. Tifa revisits Nibelheim in the height of the village's downfall. She first sees a younger version of herself, more innocent and unafflicted by the guilt and loss that changed her. She can't reconnect with this version of herself and instead finds a younger Cloud in their spot on the watchtower. Cloud is non-responsive, much like his counterpart in the present day. The village quickly catches fire and she can't get through to him, chasing him through the burning village. This sequence is increasingly relevant at this point in the story as Tifa is losing Cloud all over again to Mako degeneration and Sephiroth's influence. Young Cloud points towards Tifa's father as he rushes off towards the reactor. She begs him not to go again. Not again. The sequence ends with her witnessing her father die in her arms in front of the reactor. It highlights her powerlessness to alter events she can see unravel in front of her eyes. She knows something is wrong with Cloud in the present day and can't do anything about it. She is living in constant fear of having to relive that overwhelming sense of loss that redefined her when Nibelheim was burned down. Barrett is forced to relive the downfall of his village, at this time from a different angle. He makes his way through North Corel in its peaceful heyday. There isn't any hostility towards him. This is before the tragedy which befalls his people. He sees Myrna And although he loves her, he knows something is wrong. Something terrible is about to happen. His warning falls on deaf ears as the scene changes and shifts to the immediate aftermath of Shinra's devastation of their settlement. Barrett struggles to make his way through the destroyed townland, eventually finding Myrna's body, begging her not to leave him again. We see just how heavily this loss plays on Barrett's mind, a recurring trauma which the game forces him to constantly relive. Yuffie has a trial in this section too. Of the main cast, while Yuffie does have her fair share of loss and trauma to contend with, I do find that she manages to retain her sense of self the best. She is the youngest of the cast and frankly acts just like it. Most of the time she's carefree with an outgoing disposition. The loss of Sonon is a major event that does weigh heavily on her, but it doesn't appear to haunt her, at least not as much as the rest of the main cast. This brings us to Aerith, the last character I'm going to talk about. You might notice that I haven't talked much about Cloud at all, and that's for good reason. There's too much ground to cover here. It's not clear how much he remembers, and how that impacts his actions. And of what he does remember, whose memory is it? Aerith is a special case for this discussion. She has had it rough. Her trial shows us her escape sequence with her mother from Hojo's lab. Ifalna is dying, and young Aerith runs through Sector 7 desperately looking for a doctor to save her dying mother. No one pays her any attention, except for a passing Elmira, her future adoptive mother. Powerless to help her mother, Aerith returns as Ifalna passes away in front of her. She can't even stay to say a proper goodbye. Shinra is hunting her. Here she loses her mother and doesn't even get the closure of a funeral rite to say goodbye. She has to leave her mother, and the only other remaining Cetra in known existence, at the side of the road in the slums. Knowing what she is escaping from, Hojo and his experiments, this has even worse implications of what might happen to her body. And I'm sure Aerith must have thought of this. Aerith's connection to the planet and the life stream provides her with a different outlook on life compared to the rest of the cast. In the present day, Aerith's knowledge of future events and fate give her every reason to be overwhelmed, knowing what's to come to stop Sephiroth. She knows she must make the ultimate sacrifice to save the planet. The final loss for her is her own life, and she knows it. It's unknown how clearly she knows the events of her own demise, or for how long for that matter, but she never allowed this knowledge to hold her back. Even with the looming loss of her own life, she never lets on throughout the game, enjoying every moment. She refused to allow loss to define her. And I think this decision is what makes Aerith a special case. She processed her loss in life and chose to live life to its fullest. The rest of the cast still carry their loss with them, allowing it to guide their every action, even if they don't see it themselves. I think that the narrative of the game is trying to make the point that the others will have to confront their loss and trauma, just like Aerith has, in order to create a better world for both themselves and the planet. The game ends with another loss that they will feel collectively. Aerith is gone, and I think that they are going to have to accept this loss, process her sacrifice, and acknowledge their own respective pain to bring about the change they want in the world. The game is titled Rebirth, and I think that the rebirth that the game is referring to is the rebirth of the characters. They need to work through their loss and suffering and stop allowing it to dictate every action to effectively confront Sephiroth. Tifa is terrified at the thought of losing Cloud and acts like it, walking on eggshells around him. Every time she hesitates, doesn't speak her mind, or chooses to remain quiet, I think she's afraid of losing this found family. She can't allow her world to burn down again. Barrett feels the need to charge into the action, guns blazing. He can't let his inaction lead to another massacre, so forces himself to be belligerently proactive at every encounter. Whenever Part 3 drops and the characters process Aerith's fate, however exactly that plays out this time around, I think dealing with these types of mental scars will be a vital step in preparing to save the planet. Rebirth has certainly set the stage, and I think they will capitalize on this theme of reinvention. So what do you think? Have these guys suffered enough already, or do they need to go through more? Aside from years of therapy, what direction do you think they should take the sequel? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're there, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. It really does help out a lot. Thanks for listening.